Hi, I'm Matty, and this is Voices from the Neuroverse.
Hi, I'm Tim, Tim Holden. Um, yeah,
So today we'll be talking about our first part of W Voices of Choice, human rights project, I suppose. I've come to talk today to Tim, and we're gonna have a conversation. So the first question, the first human
discussion.
right, yeah,
Mm,
discussion we're gonna have
mm,
is about the right to life.
yeah.
So Tim, do you have any views on that first of all?
Well, I think it's a very, as a right, I think it's an essential one, isn't it? Really, the right to life. Everyone's got a right to live and have a life, and I think from my understanding of human rights, that's literally the cornerstone to the whole idea of rights, and having that as a right is just a given, really, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
See, I like how you said cornerstone.
mm,
Because I'll be honest, I don't know much about human rights. I've never really looked into it,
mm,
but obviously now we're doing it as a project, I need to sort of,
mm,
research it. But the right to life is a basic, a standard. Everyone should be, you're right, everyone should be entitled to it.
mm,
Everyone deserves to have a life.
yeah,
So why people shouldn't have their life taken away from them. Everyone has their own right to a life.
yeah. I think it is one of those that I think I'm going to explain what my work is.
That's good.
So yeah, so I'm an expert by experience and project support officer for the All Age Autism Framework, which is a project that's run by Black Country Healthcare. It was originally started as a co-production led project called the All Age Autism Roadmap, and we had a number of sessions on human rights, and there were a lot of discussions around rights and the understanding and people's knowledge of them, because they're out there for people to understand and read and find, but there's a lot of issues around actually people completely being able to connect to them. So we basically spent a lot of those our co-production sessions saying that, well, we need to educate more people, and I'm really glad that Dublin for Choices are now sort of doing that work. Um, and Matty obviously is part of that project. And so I think that's sort of why he wanted to sort of talk to me, because there were a number of conversations that went on there around sort of how the rights worked and were actually were enforced as well, because there's been a lot of discussions in sort of the current politics of this country around how the EU Convention of Human Rights is being sort of questioned in terms of how involved Britain gets into that. And it's a crucial discussion, because the history of human rights is fascinating, because obviously it came about after all the tragic stuff that happened in uh, World War Two, and the genocides and terrible acts that were caused by both sides, and during that conflict. And it came about as a basically, we never want this to happen again. So we came up with this charter of rights that has morphed into this sort of legal precedent that actually fundamentally has allowed people to live the lives we're living. So the whole idea of them is to basically um, give people like a life, and freedom to be able to never let these sort of atrocities happen. And the Court of Human Rights is designed to basically defend those rights. And there's been a lot of questions on actually how Britain, because of the politics, actually links into that. And there's discussions of coming out of it. And I think it's really crucial that we realise that if we came out of that, we'd be back at the stage where we wouldn't have the freedoms and the choices and the lives that we have. because these rights literally stop powerful dictators and people of influence from basically abusing the populace. So yeah.
Tim, that was very powerful. Yeah, really, really.
Yeah.
What you said was like it's true. Really, I think it's true. You know, you're right. People. If we come out of the Human Rights Act, people of power. You've got people of power could
Do what they wanted.
do what they want,
basically.
basically, and there's nothing we can do about it. So that is
Yeah.
quite a big thing.
Mm.
I'm going to move on to the next question I want to ask you. It's about the right to a private and family life.
Yeah. So, from my understanding of that, it's very much it's around obviously having the freedom to have whatever sort of relationship or community life, partner or sort of family. There's a lot of discussion around who people have relationships with. LGBT community is a key thing of that. And that right's basically saying, well, you have a right to live that life no matter what you choose. And it's a defence for those whole conversations. And obviously, there's now other laws that have fed into that around, obviously, same-sex marriage and other stuff that have allowed that law to almost be more accessible for other minority groups. So yeah, and I think for me, I think it's a crucial thing because I think there's a lot of issues around privacy and family, and the choices that people make in how they live their lives. And I think it's crucial that that is a right, a right that you are able to have this fundamental again, because it is a fundamental. Because having a family, having sort of the experiences that you would being, part of a family as well as a private life, because the world is constantly evolving around sort of communication and how people are engaging with people, and there does need to be a right on how private that is.
Yeah.
And some, you've got like celebs sharing stuff around family, and you've got YouTubers and stuff that share their whole lives online. But there still needs to be this sort of right for people that don't want that, to have that opportunity to almost defend that, if you know what I mean, if it becomes a threat. So
I
yeah.
was going to say, family,
Mm.
you're right to have a family, but family can come in different forms. It doesn't just have to be mom or dad. If there's no
Yeah, exactly.
mom or dad figure, it could be you could have siblings.
Yeah, exactly.
You could have people, you could have grandparents. Some people are raised by grandparents, so you should have a right to some sort of family, whether it's grandparents, parents, siblings, uncles, aunties, anything like that. You should be able the right to have a family and to a private life. Well, as an autistic man, me, I respect my privacy. I like to keep things to myself. I like to. I don't know about you, Tim, but for me, I like to live a quite peaceful life.
Yeah.
And if that was taken away from me, if I was thrown into the public light, which I'm not that I would, but you know what I mean. If I was like, if I couldn't live my beaten safe life, I would really distress me.
I think it is one of those where it's something that really needs to be considered, with the way that the world is at the moment, around obviously the the stuff that goes on around sort of private information being shared. It's clear that there needs to be some sort of enforcement of how that's shared, and how that's respected in some ways. And I get that freedom of information is a key, is a key sort of thing that needs to be considered, but there is some information that the rest of the world doesn't need to know about.
Yeah.
You should have the freedom to keep certain things to yourself, and the same with family. People, they should have a right to whatever family situation or uh, sort of like sibling, relationship, that they want, and it's just, again, it's a fundamental. People should be allowed to do um, to have this right and be able to be respected around that. Because there are some people that just don't want to share anything. They're happy. Well, you were the same. That you like having your own space and the freedom to be yourself without having to worry about the rest of the world. And I'm the same. This where we are now is my flat. I'm happy to share it on this video. This is my safe space away from the rest of the world. So it's one of those where when I don't want to interact or engage with the chaos, I come here and it's my sort of zone out space. So yeah, and it's that I think one of the other rights is freedom of having a home, and as that falls into in like one of the ones like sort of home life and
So it's protection of property.
yeah, that's so yeah, so that whole thing.
Now, can you explain to me what? I think I've got an idea what it means, but
Yeah.
do you know what it means, Tim?
So again, the rights are very subjective sometimes, and they're basic because there's so many loopholes that can be sort of inferred. But it is one of those where personal property could be anything to anyone. It could be a drinks bottle, for example, that's you bought with your own money, and that's your only personal property that you have, or you have a house or a car, and it is literally it's because there are some people that don't have anything but the clothes on their back,
Yeah.
or and that's clearly something that really, again, it's a fundamental. You've got to allow people to have that autonomy over their own objects and the resources that they live off. Um, People forget sometimes that it's difficult to um, comprehend, but there's been times in history where everything is, people haven't had the right to own something of their own, and they've not had the freedom to sort of be able to uh, even afford something, and having that right of owning something and having autonomy over something is really crucial. But I also think that it's a key thing around the whole conversation around what's public property and what's personal property, which is a whole other kettle of fish, because you think about it, and you've got a lot of arguments around things that should be shared among the whole community. And it's like, well, arguably, yes, but there still needs to be some autonomy and control over who's responsible for it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because if everyone owned everything, then no one would take responsibility, would they?
No.
And it's that whole thing. And I think there was, for example, there's a lot of stuff around sort of responsibilities of homeowners and people that rent things, um, and they and what I'm trying to say. So you've got this big housing crisis at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of people are in council houses or renting places.
Yeah.
And it's one of those where the whole purpose of having housing and having somewhere to live is that you have that space of your own. And I think it's really key that people have that right to have personal property that's their own.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I ask a
mm,
question?
mm,
So it's like someone owning a house,
mm,
but then a bigger person, I'm
mm,
not saying as in bigger, higher up in the food chain,
mm,
they come and say, "Right, you've got to leave your house now." For no reason, they just say, "We want this house, we've got to leave." It's like taking your property away from you
mm,
and saying you can't do anything about it. You should be able to, if you own something and it's yours and
mm,
you know it's yours,
mm,
you should be able to keep it as yours. If you've done nothing wrong, then
Yeah.
you're not.
I think that's the whole point of having these rights, isn't it? It's almost they don't necessarily enforce anything themselves, but they're incorporated in other legal
Yeah,
laws that allow them to basically go, well, that's a human right. I own this property. You can't just kick me out without good just cause, and I still have a right to,
yeah.
it's the same sort of,
So they're very useful.
yeah, yeah, they are useful, but they almost complement other laws,
Okay,
and that's the whole idea of them.
that's
Is
really,
yeah,
that makes them quite powerful. Because
yeah,
if you can
yeah,
imagine if you're a lawyer and you're in court and you say you represent your client and they say
mm,
this, and then you refer it to a human right,
mm.
can be quite, should
Yeah,
hold something in favour.
sort of whole things. Again, there's a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
grey.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of complicated stuff, and every situation is different. And legal terminology can be really, really complicated, and that's why we have lawyers, and we don't. A lot of people don't represent themselves, but these rights in general are really there to almost go. I have this fundamental um, right, but also responsibility to make sure that these rights are upheld. Uh, you know, and I think that's key, isn't it? So yeah.
Okay, so I've got one more to ask you.
Mm.
It's about the right to education.
Right, yeah. Which I think this is an interesting topic because, um, education again is a term for in sort of teaching and learning, but there's different forms of education.
Yeah,
So,
there's a lot, as we know.
and it's one of those where arguably, um, obviously we have a very structured, organised system of education in this country. But there are other countries that don't, and having the human right to basically go, you have a right to be educated is a key thing. A lot of women back in the day,
They
for
can go.
example, weren't allowed to go to school
Still happens though in
in some
some
countries.
countries
Yeah,
around the world. There's
yeah,
some countries that women can't go to school, they're not, and if
yeah.
there's been, I'm not going to name any countries in
Mm,
particular, but there's a certain country where a girl went to school and she was,
mm.
shot. So
Exactly, and it's one of those where that's why we have laws like this. And again, they're not necessarily enforced in the same way in certain countries because of their own beliefs
yeah,
and stuff. But the whole point of them being a worldwide sort of united front on these rights means that other countries can almost be able to what's the word, show that this is a key thing, and everyone has a right, from a young child to an old person of these rights. These rights are designed so that everyone is given these fundamental sort of keys to the castle, if you know what I
yeah,
mean.
because school, I mean, any sort of school,
Mm,
it doesn't matter if it's special provision, if it's mainstream school,
mm,
if it's like a starting school, like
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah,
it could be anything.
yeah.
As long as you should be getting some sort of education, because
Mm.
education helps you
Well,
build and get the building
Well,
blocks.
it's funny, isn't it? We're talking about education, and this whole conversation is about educating people on rights.
Yeah,
And I think there's a lot more that we could discuss around each right and how complicated and how actually all these rights have there are barriers to these rights as well as
yeah,
as well as their fundamental rights, and they're things that people should be able to use as an example of accessing things and doing stuff. But there are complications and there are issues. And like we were saying, there are certain countries that don't accept them in certain
yeah,
ways. And like I said, these countries have conversations in the past around how we interpret them. And every country's got a right to
yeah.
be autonomous and have their own views on it. But at the same time, as a human being, these rights like I was saying, allow for people to actually defend against persecution and really dangerous things that are still going on in this world. Arguably, the stuff that's going on in certain places in the world. I'm not going to name anything specifically, but there are some places that are in conflict, that human rights violations are being made, and it's one of those where the whole idea of this is so that people have something to almost fall back on and go, how can you've broken this right? How can we actually try and sort of stop this from happening? It's enforcing it, and I think there's a lot of conversation about how that's enforced in certain places.
Yeah,
But
because
yeah,
a lot of people. I'm not gonna name. As I said, you're not gonna name any places, but there's certain leaders
mm,
that break human rights,
mm,
and there's like you said, genocide, and
yeah, exactly.
people that are dying and stuff,
Mm,
and they're having their human rights basically taken over them because they're
yeah,
not alive, they're basically murdered,
yeah,
and
or injured,
or injured or anything.
or
Yeah, yeah.
harmed in some
Uh-huh.
way.
And it's like people. This is why they take them to the court in Europe or
Mm,
wherever it is,
yeah,
and they the it's the Hague in the Hague. I don't know if
yeah,
you know about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's
It is, yeah. There's a
it's
Pacific.
where for war crimes.
Yeah,
That's what I mean. So
mm,
even when human rights are broken up to an extent, people get charged with war unless it's gone off a bit.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
they can get charged for war crimes because
yeah,
they broke so many people's human rights. They've injured them. They've killed them.
yeah,
They've done all sorts,
yeah,
and it just makes you think that we are lucky in this country that
mm,
we're not like
yeah.
being suppressed like other countries.
Yeah, and I think that's a real key thing. And I think obviously going back to the education conversation, educating people on these rights is a key thing. And I think education provisions and the right to education almost needs to be
It should be included.
included. This whole right to education. There needs to be almost a sub heading on that everyone needs to almost be educated on what their rights and responsibilities are as a member of society. And because we're talking about rights here and stuff, but there is also like a lot of conversation of what is the responsibility of someone of the community. What should they be expected as a member of society to live up to? There almost needs to be this almost counteractive element that goes, well, these are your rights, but you've also got to almost promote these rights or make sure that other people are not getting abused by these rights, and these rights are enforced, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because
And
if some people won't speak out,
mm,
but like if they knew someone that weren't so the human rights are being abused, or
mm,
they say like the first question, they weren't having a right to life. They're being,
yeah,
they're being controlled
controlled or
by
imprisoned or yeah,
whatever. Like,
yeah,
because some people are controlled by the families,
mm, mm,
and they're not allowed to do anything.
mm,
They have to stay at home all the time. They're not allowed to.
yeah,
Some
yeah,
people are not allowed to go to education.
yeah. And
It's
again,
wrong.
it's the same with there's a lot of us saying about the housing crisis and renting and stuff. There's a lot of rights around having um, having your own home that are probably there's probably violations there in terms of how our legal system is dealing with um, landlords and stuff like that, which is a key issue. So it all really forms this whole complicated mess that really politics and sort of society almost needs to um, look at the rights conversation and go, well, actually, how are we incorporating that into our daily life? And I think that's what's keyly needs to happen with the whole sort of educating people on it. So yeah,
So yeah, that's
mm,
true. Uh, As a last couple of pointers, Tim,
mm,
out of what we've talked about today,
mm,
I think we've had a good conversation, and
yeah,
we've talked about
mm,
human rights. We've gone off a bit tangents, but it's
yeah,
all flowed. It's very nice,
mm,
and I just think, Yeah, you're a good person to talk to. You're very well educated. And I like,
I try. I like learning. So
yeah,
that whole right for education, I love learning. So anything, and again, I'm happy to say I'm wrong about some of this stuff. So having a discussion is a real key thing because
no,
it's one of those where I know that my opinions aren't the only I'm not a dictator. I'm happy to listen to other people, and have their views sort of.
yeah, no, but I've learnt a lot from you today
Mm,
because I don't know much about human rights. You know a lot more than me, and I'll learn from you. So thank you, Tim.
yeah, no problem.
I'm Matty,
I'm Tim.
and this is Voices from the Neuroverse.